Narration Prompt 1. Chapter 1: The Night King's Fall. The torches of Winterfell trembled in the wind like 1,000 frightened hearts. Snow came slantwise across the open fields, smearing the horizon into a single, indistinct dark. The cold had a taste to it tonight, Arya Stark thought, sharp as iron on the tongue, like biting a blade. She stood on the inner wall beside the battlements, the fletching of an arrow brushing her ear as a nameless northern archer shifted nervously at her side. Below, the ordered ranks of the Unsullied waited in perfect stillness, shields locked, spears planted into frozen earth. Behind them, the northern levies shuffled and muttered beneath their layered furs, breath misting in pale clouds. Ghost padded restlessly along the front of the line, white fur and red eyes a streak of living bone in the gloom. Above, dragons screamed. Arya tilted her head back. For a heartbeat she caught sight of Drogon, a vast shadow cutting across the swollen moon, wings beating the storm into spirals. Regal followed a little higher, green scales swallowed by clouds. Jon Snow was up there somewhere, clinging to spikes and leather, his face set in that stubborn, half-bewildered sort of courage he wore like armor. Daenerys Targaryen would be on the other, silver hair whipped back by the wind, jaw clenched tight as if she could hold back death itself by refusing to yield. It did not matter. Death was coming anyway. Arya. Sansa Stark's voice drew her glance. Her sister stood a few paces away, wrapped in her heavy gray cloak, the direwolf pin at her shoulder touched with frost. Sansa's hair was braided and looped about her head like a crown, and her eyes flicked over the field with a calm that Arya did not entirely trust. Calm could be another kind of fear. "You should be in the crypts," Sansa said. "And you should be in the south, sipping wine and listening to fools flatter you," Arya replied. "We both chose the wrong life." Sansa's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "They say dragons breathe fire hot enough to melt stone. I hope they are right." Arya looked back to the darkness where the dead waited. "I hope so too." Horns sounded, deep and rolling, echoing off Winterfell's towers like the groan of some great, waking beast. The Unsullied ranks tightened. The Dothraki screamed. Ser Jorah Mormont rode out at the head of the screamers, Longclaw's twin, Heartsbane, resting across his knees. The sight of the old knight mounted among the sea of Arrax struck Arya with a strange pang. She remembered him on the road with Yoren's ragged band, remembered his blunt face and wary kindness toward a king in chains. Now he was nothing but another silhouette against the storm, another life thrown at the dark. The Melisandre woman, the Red Priestess, moved through the Dothraki ranks like a flicker of her own god's fire. Arya watched as she laid her bare hands upon Arrax, lips moving soundlessly, and one by one the blades burst into flame. A ripple of astonished cheers passed through the Dothraki, their fear transmuting into frenzy. Lines of fire arced across the field as they lifted their weapons high. "She came back," Arya murmured. "She did," Sansa said softly. "I hope it was for something more than a show." The Dothraki advanced, then broke into a full charge, a tidal rush of horses and flame. The screamers' battle cries rose above the howl of the wind, wild and exultant. Their burning blades drew streaks through the night like comets falling toward the unseen shore of the dead. For a moment Arya allowed herself to believe that the sight meant something, that men and fire and desperate courage could push back the night. The flames danced higher, a living storm racing out across the snow, bright against the blank dark. Then one by one, the flames began to wink out. Narration Prompt 2. The first few extinguished lights might have been tricks of the eyes, lanterns swaying in the wind, a stumble, a fall. Then more vanished, then more. A few flames wheeled wildly, as if their bearers had lost control of reins or nerve. In less time than it took to draw a steady breath, the glorious charging wave of fire had become scattered embers, swallowed by the dark. The screaming changed. It was no longer the triumphant howl of men riding to kill. It was a higher, broken sound, torn from throats that did not expect mercy. Horses shrieked, metal clanged, The wind picked up the sound and hurled it at Winterfell's walls until every man standing there could taste it. The last flames died. The field beyond the unsullied lines was nothing now but blackness and snow. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the dead hit. They came as a wall of pale shapes erupting from the dark, a tide of bodies crashing against the unsullied shields. Arya heard Grey Worm shouting in his harsh, clipped tongue, orders threading through chaos. Spears drove forward in unison, impaling the first ranks of whites, but still they came, climbing over their own fallen, clawing at shields, jaws snapping. Parts of them were missing, arms torn away, half a face gone, a throat ripped open, but still they dragged themselves forward. Flaming projectiles arced from Winterfell's catapults, bright sweeps of orange that smashed into the dead ranks and burst into gouts of fire. Pockets of whites turned to ash, but more piled over them, smothering the flames with their own burned, broken bodies. "Archers!" someone bellowed along the wall. "Loose! Loose!" Arrows hissed down. Some found eyes, some bones, some simply lodged in rotting flesh to no effect. The dead shrieked without voices and pushed closer. A horn's triple blast signaled retreat. The Unsullied began to fall back in orderly squares, shield by shield, step by measured step, buying time with discipline and with blood. Behind them, running through gaps like smoke, streamed the ragged survivors of the Dothraki. Those few whose horses had managed to turn before the dark closed its fist around them. Arya's fingers itched for the weight of a blade. She rested her hand on the hilt at her hip instead and watched the living bend and buckle. Every time she had ever been helpless burned through her like fever, the Red Keep, Harrenhal, the twins. She was not that girl now. She would not stand and watch while monsters tore apart everything she had left. A shout rose from the inner courtyard. A new sound split the storm. The roar of a dragon, closer, angrier. Drogon slammed into the front ranks of the dead like a falling star, the gust of his wings tearing lines in the snow. His massive body coiled, and a river of fire poured from his jaws, sweeping across the battlefield in a great, searing arc. Whites shriveled and blackened, flailing as they were charred into shapes like burned branches. Rhaegal crashed down a heartbeat later from the other side, his green fire a counterpoint to Drogon's red gold. Arya's hair whipped about her face, the heat washing up to the walls. For a moment the dead were forced back, their advance broken by flame and fury. The Unsullied rallied in the gap. On Drogon's back, Daenerys Targaryen was a small, pale figure amid the roar and blaze. She leaned with the dragon's movements, hand fisted in the spikes along his neck, expression pinched with more than the cold. Above, Jon Snow on Rhaegal tried to bring his dragon around to flank, but the storm grew thicker, wind and snow swirling in unnatural patterns as if some vast, invisible hand were shaping the blizzard. Arya felt the hair rise on her arms. "He is here," Melisandre murmured at her elbow. Arya startled. She had not noticed the red woman climb to the wall. The priestess's hair was down, whipping about her drawn face, and the ruby at her throat pulsed with a dull, throbbing light that did not come from any torch. "Who?" Arya asked, though she knew the answer. "The one your brother and your queen go to meet," Melisandre said. "The one who thinks himself the end of all stories." The storm over the field thickened further, swallowing the dragons in cloud. Arya lost sight of them entirely, only their roars echoing above, panicked and enraged. "What do you see?" Arya asked. "Snow," the red woman said, closing her eyes. "Ice, fire. I see choices. I see a girl at a fork in a long road, dagger in her hand. I see eyes closing because she willed it so. Brown eyes, green eyes." Her lids flicked open, and her gaze cut to Arya. "And blue eyes that are not for you." Arya's jaw tightened. "He wears blue eyes. Not all of them are yours to claim," Melisandre replied. "You have danced in many halls and worn many names, Arya Stark. There are thrones yet you have not walked behind, queens yet you have not seen die. Death comes in many colors." She reached out, fingers like talons, and for an instant Arya almost flinched away. Instead, she held her ground as Melisandre's hand brushed her cheek, warm even in the freezing wind. "You have said the words before," the priestess whispered. "Say them again." Arya thought of Syrio Farrell, the first sword of Braavos, standing between her and death with nothing but a wooden blade. She thought of the Hound, of his rough voice and rougher hands, dragging her away from the twins. She thought of the countless faces she had worn to bring her list closer to empty. "What do we say to death?" Melisandre asked. "Not today," Arya murmured. "Good." The Red Woman smiled, thin and fierce. "Then run. The gods are watching. All of them." Narration prompt 3. The sky had become a maze of ice. Regal lurched as a sudden crosswind slammed into his flank. One wing dropping, Jon Snow's stomach lurching with the movement. He clung harder to the leather harness, fingers stiff with cold despite the thick gloves. Ice crystals formed on his lashes. The world narrowed to the rise and fall of the dragon beneath him, the rush of air that stole his breath. "Higher!" he shouted, though Regal needed no command. The dragon fought to climb, wings beating furiously, claws churning the air. The storm clawed at them, sleet biting at Jon's exposed skin. He could see nothing of the battlefield below, only a roiling mass of cloud and shadow. Then, through a brief rent in the white, he saw a third form. Viserion swooped past like a ghost, half of his flesh gone, ribs and claws limned in blue-white light from within. His ruined wings cut through the storm with terrible grace. Upon his back stood the Night King, tall and impossibly still, long spear in hand. The blue of his eyes burned with a cold that was not of this world. "Dany!" Jon roared, though the wind tore the word from his mouth. "Dany!" He felt more than saw Drogon's presence, a dark bulk cutting across the storm. A roar answered him, deeper, angrier, and a jet of red-gold fire ripped through the clouds, missing Viserion by a dragon's length. The Night King did not flinch. He turned his head slightly as if curious. Viserion's maw opened. Blue flame, strange and fierce, cleaved the night. It met Drogon's fire in a clash that turned the clouds into boiling glass, steam and light and shattered ice exploding outward. Regal shrieked, flinching, his body twisting to avoid the sudden blast of heat and cold. For a few heart-stopping moments, Jon and his dragon were nothing but a leaf in a hurricane. Below, Winterfell was a smudge of deeper shadow beneath the swirling snow. Jon forced his thoughts down to the Godswood, to the heart tree where Bran Stark waited with Theon Greyjoy and a thin ring of men. The Night King's end was supposed to be there. Bran had seen it, had said it would be so. But Bran had also said that the future was not a road, but a forest. Branches, paths, choices. Regal steadied, banking hard. Jon leaned with him, teeth gritted against the sting of freezing wind. Viserion surged past again, this time almost close enough for Jon to see the flayed muscle where scales had once been. The Night King lifted his spear and hurled it. Regal twisted. The spear passed so near it seemed to graze the dragon's flank. Frost bloomed along the leather straps at Jon's leg, crackling like tiny screams. Jon's heart hammered in his throat. "Burn him," he shouted. "Burn them both." Regal answered with a blast of fire that lit the blizzard from within, a sun flaring in the storm. It washed over Viserion's chest and wings. For an instant, through the glare, Jon thought he saw the Night King wreathed in flame. When the light faded, the Night King was still standing. Embers drifted around him, hissing as they met the unnatural cold. His armor gleamed faintly, untouched. "He does not burn," Jon breathed. He had seen that once already on the narrow lake of hard, dead ice, when Daenerys Targaryen's dragons had tried to annihilate a ring of whites and their master and had failed. Viserion's death had been the price then. Now the same dead dragon wheeled toward Winterfell, raking the sky with blue fire, and the Night King looked down upon the castle as a man might look upon an anthill. Regal roared and plunged after him. Jon thought of Bran, of his strange, distant calm, of Sansa Stark on the walls, of Arya Stark somewhere below, seen last with that fierce, hungry look in her eyes that meant she was about to do something reckless and brave. "Take me to him," Jon said. Rhaegal's body angled downward. Narration prompt 4. The first blow had come out of nowhere. One moment Arya was sprinting along the inner corridor. The next a section of the outer wall exploded inward, stone and splinters and frozen earth slamming her sideways. She hit the flagstones hard, rolled, and came up with her dagger in hand out of instinct more than thought. Her ears rang. The world wobbled at the edges. She saw, for an instant, the silhouette of a dragon's skull through the gaping hole in the wall, blue fire rushing past like a river. The courtyard beyond filled with shrieking and the sound of collapsing stone. Something massive crashed down in the distance. A white lurched through the breach, empty eyes burning with dull, unnatural light. Arya threw herself forward, her dagger flashing. Obsidian bit through its skull. The thing folded without a sound. She ducked under its falling body and forced herself to her feet. The corridors had become a maze of smoke and shadow. Men ran past her, some with faces she knew, most with faces she did not, all streaked with blood and soot. From somewhere below came screams, a high, wavering chorus that told her the crypts were no longer safe. The dead had found a way in there as well. She had to move. Standing still meant being buried or trampled or torn apart. Somehow, the chaos pushed her into the library. The heavy door banged shut behind her, muting the roar of battle to a distant storm. The library was a long hall of shelves and ladders and dusty old leather, the air thick with the smell of parchment and oil. Moonlight lanced in through narrow, high windows, painting pale rectangles on the floor. The quiet was wrong. The quiet felt like a held breath. Arya's own breath sounded too loud in her ears. Something shuffled at the far end of the hall. She dropped into a crouch, moving from shadow to shadow, the dagger reversed in her grip. The dragonglass spear Gendry had fashioned for her strapped securely across her back. Every lesson she had ever learned in Bravos, every step she had taken in the House of Black and White, came back to her in the rhythm of her feet and the way she controlled her breathing. She became small. She became the space between one heartbeat and the next. A white turned the corner of an aisle, head cocked, jaw hanging loosely as if the flesh did not quite remember how to hold itself together. Behind it shuffled another and another. Their nails scraped along the edges of shelves, leaving grooves in old wood. Arya slipped between shelves, pressing her back to the rough spines of books. She could hear them, could smell them now beneath the stench of dust, rot and cold and old grave earth. One passed within an arm's reach. Its fingers brushed the end of her sleeve. It did not turn. She waited until the scrape of their feet moved on. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Somewhere above, the dragons roared again, the sound muffled by stone. Arya edged forward, eyes scanning each gap between shelves. A fallen candlestick lay in her path. She stepped over it, careful. Her foot came down on something slick. She glanced down. Blood. For a heartbeat, her stomach lurched. She saw her own face staring up at her from the floor, pale and dead, eyes open and unseeing. Then she realized it was only a reflection, wavering in a small pool of blood that had spread from somewhere deeper in the aisle. She looked up. A young man lay slumped against the base of a shelf, throat ripped open. His eyes had been torn out, leaving empty holes. The whites had feasted and moved on. His face was slack, the lines of fear smoothed away in death. Arya swallowed. He might have been one of the boys who trained in the yard, or one of the nameless men who repaired roofs and cleaned latrines and cooked the stews that had kept them all alive this winter. She would never know now. Death had taken his name as easily as it had taken his life. "You should be quieter," she whispered to him anyway. An old habit from journeys where leaving bodies behind had been a luxury. "They'll hear you breathing." The absurdity of it nearly made her laugh. Instead, she moved on. Another white turned the corner ahead, this one quicker. Its head snapped toward her, nostrils flaring as if it could scent the living. Arya threw herself sideways into a roll as it lunged, arms outstretched. Its fingers scraped the air where her throat had been a heartbeat earlier. She came up on one knee, dagger whipping up, and drove the dragonglass into its temple. The white spasmed, then collapsed across her legs, pinning her. More shuffled around the end of the shelf, drawn by the sudden movement. Arya wrenched her dagger free and kicked the corpse off, heart pounding. She darted between shelves again, but this time the whites had the direction of her flight. Hands clawed at books, at ladders, at each other in their eagerness to reach her. A bony hand snagged her cloak. She shrugged out of it, leaving the torn fabric behind. Another corridor, another corner. The heavy double doors at the far end loomed like salvation. Arya sprinted. The whites poured after her, feet drumming, breathless, silent, their jaws working. She could feel them behind her, could almost feel their fingers brushing the ends of her hair. The doors grew larger, closer. Something slammed into them from the other side. They burst open, and a wave of cold air washed in. For a heartbeat, Arya thought the dead had found her again. Then she saw fire, flickering wildly, and a familiar broad-shouldered shape silhouetted against it. "Girl!" Sandor Clegane roared. "Move!" She threw herself through the gap. The hound's sword came down in a sweeping arc, carving through the first white to reach the threshold. Flame from a half-toppled brazier spilled across the floor, catching parchment and old cloth. The whites in the doorway shrank back from the sudden flare. Behind Sandor Clegane, Beric Dondarrion raised his flaming sword and waded into the press with a hoarse cry, his ruined eye blazing with a zealot's light. "You were always going to the bloody library," Sandor muttered as he seized Arya's arm and dragged her back down the corridor, away from the gathering dead. "Can't stay away from the dust, can you?" She stumbled alongside him, ribs aching, head still ringing. "You came back for me. Don't flatter yourself." His hand tightened on her arm as another section of the ceiling crumbled ahead, stone shattering across the floor in a spray. "Priest said you mattered. For once I listened." Behind them, Beric Dondarrion's roar turned briefly into a strangled scream, then cut off. The flames flickered. The dead flowed into the gap he had defended. "Run," Sandor said again. So she did. Narration prompt 5. They burst into a side chamber, the door slamming shut behind them. Sandor Clegane shoved a fallen bench against it with a grunt, bracing it with his shoulder. The wood rattled as something heavy struck the other side. Arya spun, blades ready. Melisandre stood near the hearth, its fire banked low. Her red dress was torn at the hem, streaked with ash, but she was otherwise untouched. She looked as if she had been waiting there for hours rather than minutes, the calm at the center of the storm. "Again we meet in the dark," she said. Sandor snorted. "If you've got magic to keep them out, now would be a good time." "I have done what I was meant to do," Melisandre replied. Her gaze did not leave Arya. "The rest belongs to you." Arya had no breath left for riddles. "If you have something useful to say, say it. Do you remember what I saw when last I looked into your eyes?" The Red Woman asked. "I remember you threatening to kill me and my brother," Arya said coldly. "I said you would shut many eyes forever." Melisandre stepped closer, the ruby at her throat throbbing. "Eyes of different colors. I have been given more clarity since then. You said brown and green and blue." Arya's throat felt tight. "Blue like his." "Blue like his," Melisandre agreed. "But some fates are not for one soul alone to carry. The blue eyes that command this dead storm are bound to more than you. The dragons have their part, and the wolf who rides the green one has his." Her mouth curved in something that might have been pity. "You are not the knife that ends the long night." Arya felt the words like a blow. Since the moment she had heard the stories of the Night King and his army, part of her had imagined slipping behind him in the dark, dagger ready, the greatest name on any list. The idea had settled under her skin like a secret flame. She knew how to strike from shadows. What was a king of death to a girl who could be no one? "You're wrong," she said. "I can kill him." "You could," Melisandre said. "Perhaps in one path, one branch of the forest, you did. But the world is not made of one line. It is made of choices. She reached out, fingertips hovering near Arya's chest without touching. You have other work. Cersei Lannister, Arya said before she could stop herself. The name tasted like old blood and unshed hate. She has green eyes. Yes. The smile the red woman gave her was suddenly, unsettlingly gentle. And there are rooms in King's Landing yet where death has not walked in the right face. The pounding at the door grew louder, with splintering at the edges. Sandor cursed in a low, steady stream beneath his breath, bracing harder against the bench. If I don't kill him, who does? Arya asked. You ask the wrong question, Melisandre said. Ask instead what you must do so that he can die. She tilted her head, as if listening to some distant song only she could hear. Your brother is in the sky, chasing the shadow of death. Your other brother waits beneath the heart tree, drawing that shadow to him. There is a moment yet to be carved, a heartbeat in which the ending may be chosen. How? Arya demanded. There is a path from here to the Godswood that does not yet run with blood. Melisandre's eyes glittered, dark and bright all at once. Take it. Carry what you are there. The rest will fall into place. Arya searched her face for some hint of deception. All she saw was a woman who had wrapped herself in faith as tightly as in red cloth and would die for both without hesitation. I am not your chosen girl, Arya said. No, Melisandre said softly. You are your own. That is why you matter. The bench at the door split with a crack. Wood fragments skittered across the floor. Cold fingers punched through the gap, clawing at empty air. Sandor Clegane bared his teeth. If you're going, go, he growled. I'll keep your fans busy. Arya hesitated for a heartbeat. You'll die. I keep trying not to, he said. Doesn't seem to take. She almost smiled. Instead, she nodded once. Thank you. Just kill someone worth killing, he said. I will, Arya replied. Melisandre crossed to the opposite wall and pressed a hand to the stones. For a moment nothing happened. Then a hidden panel swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Your path, she said. Hurry. The storm gathers at the heart tree. Arya slid through the gap without another word. Behind her, the sounds of the door giving way and Sandor's roar swallowed the chamber. But the hidden passage carried her away from it quickly, down into the veins of Winterfell where the dead had not yet reached. She ran, feet sure on uneven stones, breath burning in her lungs. If she was not the knife that would end the Night King, then she would be the hand that placed it where it needed to be. And when the dead were ended, she promised herself, there would still be a queen in the south with green eyes waiting in a tower of red stone. Narration prompt 6. The Godswood was quieter than the rest of Winterfell, as if the old trees refused to acknowledge the screaming of the dead. Snow fell more gently here, clinging to the bare branches of oaks and elms, softening the edges of the world. The heart tree stood at the center of it all, red leaves shivering, its carved face streaked as ever with dried, rust-colored sap that looked too much like ancient blood. Bran Stark sat beneath its boughs, his chair positioned where the roots curved like the ribs of a great beast. His hands rested lightly on the armrests, fingers relaxed, as if he were simply listening to someone tell a story by the fire. His eyes, however, had rolled back into his head, only the whites visible, his pupils lost somewhere far beyond the snow and the storm. Theon Greyjoy paced a slow circle in front of him, bow in hand. His men, some iron-born, some lost northerners who had found their way here, stood with spears planted firmly, faces drawn, breath coming in harsh clouds. They'll come, one of the iron-born muttered. He'll bring them here. That's the point, Theon replied. He checked the bowstring again, fingers steady. We hold as long as we can. For him, the man jerked his chin toward Bran. For a boy who flies with crows. For the things I stole, Theon said. For the boys I could not save. He heard, faintly, the echo of his own name as it had been thrown at him in mockery and hate. Reek. That ghost had been fading since the day he had knelt in this very godswood to offer his life to the Starks he had betrayed. Tonight, it seemed further away than ever. The cold did that. It burned away everything that was not needed. Bran's lips parted slightly. A thin trickle of white vapor escaped, like breath made visible. "They are close," he said, voice oddly detached, as if it came from a great distance. His eyes remained rolled back, but he tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a far-off horn. "Ravens flee before him. The storm follows." "Good," Theon said. "I was starting to feel lonely." He loosed an arrow into the shadows between the trees. It struck a white in the throat, pinning it briefly to a trunk before it tore itself free, head lolling. The spearman met it with a braced line, dragging it down and stabbing until it stopped moving. Others stumbled after it, drawn by the living heat of the godwood. "Hold the line," Theon shouted. "For Winterfell." The words tasted strange in his mouth, but right. Steel clanged against bone. The dead were clumsy but relentless, each one a blunt instrument of an endless will. Spears thrust, withdrew, thrust again. Blood sprayed, some black and thick, some red and bright. Men grunted and cursed and screamed. The snow at their feet became trampled slush, streaked with color. Theon moved without thinking, every arrow an answer to a threat. A white clambered up from behind a root. He put a shaft through its eye. Another came at his flank. He pivoted and shot it through the mouth. His arm burned with the strain of the bow, but he kept drawing. "More!" someone gasped. "They just keep." The man's words ended in a wet gurgle as a dead hand closed around his throat, fingers digging in with inhuman force. Theon dropped his bow and swung the spear he had taken from another downed man, smashing the white skull. The thing fell, taking the living man with it. Theon could not tell if he still breathed. The sound changed. The dead stopped screaming, if their voiceless fury could be called such a thing. The clatter and crunch of bodies pushing forward slowed, then stilled. A strange hush descended over the godswood, thick as the snow. The living men drew back, panting, eyes darting. Through the trees they came. The White Walkers walked in a slow, measured line, their armor glimmering faintly with frost, their long spears held loosely in hands that knew neither warmth nor hurry. Their eyes glowed with the same piercing blue as their masters. They did not need to rush. The dead at their feet made way, parting like water. Behind them, surrounded by an honor guard of stillness and cold, strode the Night King. He moved as if this were a stroll through a garden, head tilted slightly, his gaze fixed on Bran beneath the heart tree. Snow hissed angrily wherever he stepped, freezing harder under his feet. Theon's mouth went dry. "Bran," he said, not looking back. "It's time." Bran's eyes rolled slowly forward, pupils returning. He blinked once, twice, as if reacquainting himself with the shape of the world. "They are here," he said. "I can see that," Theon replied hoarsely. "You have come a long way," Bran said, and now his voice carried something like warmth. "Not long enough," Theon muttered. The last of his men fell back to stand around him, forming a ragged circle. Many were bleeding. Several no longer had enough fingers to properly grip their weapons. A few glanced over their shoulders, perhaps looking for escape, for an opening in the ring of the dead. There was none. The White Walkers halted at the edge of the Godswood's open space. Their breath smoked like the exhalations of winter itself. The wind died entirely, as if unwilling to move in their presence. The Night King stepped forward alone. His eyes swept the small, defiant cluster of living men, then lingered on Theon's face. There was no expression there, no malice, no joy, only a terrible, impersonal curiosity, like a man inspecting an insect that had flown into his cup of wine. Theon's hands shook. He lifted the spear anyway. Narration prompt 7. The Night King's presence changed the air. The cold that rolled from him was not the simple bite of winter. It was a deeper thing, the absence of all warmth, all movement. The world seemed to contract around his tall, armored figure, sound itself dampening. as if refusing to draw too near. Theon felt it in his bones. His breath froze in his beard, forming tiny crystals that cracked when he opened his mouth. "You're a long way from the Iron Islands," one of his men whispered hoarsely. Theon laughed. A short, sharp sound surprised him. "I thought I'd try dying somewhere different." The Night King tilted his head, as if listening to the words without understanding them, like the echo of a language long dead. Then he stepped past the last of the fallen whites into the circle of living men. The spears wavered, then steadied. Theon could feel the men at his back, their fear like a second heartbeat pulsing against his spine. "Stand," he said. "He has to come through us." "Does he?" Bran murmured. The words made Theon want to look back, but he did not. He kept his gaze fixed on the Night King. Above the godswood, the dragon screamed again. Through gaps in the branches, Theon caught blurred glimpses of massive shapes wheeling in the storm, flashes of fire and blue light. The Night King's head turned slightly, as if something there had caught his attention. For a heartbeat his eyes left Bran. Bran's own eyes went distant again, but not all the way. He seemed to be looking at something beyond the godswood, beyond the battle, beyond the now. "He is not alone," Bran said softly. "Jon is coming. Daenerys is with him. The dragons are not enough, but together." Theon swallowed. "If you've got something useful up your sleeve, now would be a fine time, Bran." "I am trying," Bran said. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. "The storm is his, but the ravens still listen to me. I can nudge." Viserion shrieked overhead, a horrible, shredded sound. The trees shuddered as blue flame tore through the sky somewhere above, showering them briefly with a spray of melting ice. The Night King's gaze flicked up again, narrowed, then returned to Bran. He took another step forward. The circle of men tightened. Theon knew, with a sudden, brutal clarity, that their spears would mean nothing. They might slow the Night King for a heartbeat, perhaps two, but no more. They would die, and he would walk over their corpses as he walked over the countless thousands before them. Unless something changed in that heartbeat, unless someone made a choice. Theon's bow lay at his feet where he had dropped it. He bent quickly to snatch it up, fingers moving almost of their own accord. He had an arrow left. It was a thin reed against a storm, but it was the only reed he had. He knocked the arrow, drawing, aiming for the Night King's cold, inhuman eyes. "Save it," Bran said. Theon gritted his teeth. "I'm not dying without trying." "You will try," Bran said, "but not like that." His eyes rolled back farther than before until only white showed. His body went slack, slumping slightly in the chair, only the roots of the heart tree and the carved armrests keeping him upright. The wind in the godswood shifted. For an instant, Theon felt something, a vast presence passing overhead, a rush of wings not of dragon or bird but of the world itself moving. The heart tree's leaves shivered, though there was no breeze. Above, the storm thickening around the Night King's dragon shuddered. On Rhaegal's back, Jon Snow felt it too. A pressure in his skull, a distant, wordless voice like the rustle of leaves in summer. He had felt such things before, when Bran had touched the minds of beasts, but never so strongly. It was as if the entire sky had become Bran's eyes. Rhaegal roared, struggling against the unnatural wind that tried to drive him away from the godswood, away from the Night King. Jon leaned forward, urging him on, and for once the dragon seemed to find purchase against the invisible current. Below, through a brief break in the clouds, Jon saw the godswood as a pale scar in the dark, the heart tree's red crown a splash of blood. Tiny figures moved at its base. A line of white walkers, the Night King's tall form, a small clutch of men with spears. He saw his brother's chair. He saw Bran, small and still. "Down!" Jon shouted. "Take us down!" Rhaegal folded his wings, diving. The Night King looked up as the dragons descended. Frost crackled along the haft of his spear. His mouth did not smile, But there was something like expectation in the set of his shoulders, an anticipation of some long-awaited dance. Theon could feel his heart hammering in his ribs. The sound of Rhaegal's approach was like thunder wrapped in leathery wings. Snow whipped into his face. He kept the arrow trained on the Night King's chest now, not his eyes. There was something in that pale, carved face that made the idea of aiming there feel presumptuous. When the dragon was almost upon them, Bran spoke again, though his eyes remained somewhere else. "Now," he whispered. Theon did not know whether the word was for him, for Jon, for Daenerys, or for some other force entirely. He chose to believe it was for him. Narration prompt 8. Rhaegal hit the ground like a falling boulder, claws tearing furrows in the snow. The blast of wind from his wings flattened the nearest trees. The White Walkers staggered, long cloaks whipping around their skeletal forms. Several wights were tossed into the air like rag dolls, limbs flailing. Jon Snow clung to the harness until the last possible moment, then let go, dropping into a controlled fall that ended in a hard roll. He came up with Longclaw in his hand, the Valyrian steel gleaming dully in the pale light. His lungs burned with cold and exertion. His knees threatened to buckle. He did not let them. The Night King turned to face him fully. Up close, Jon could see the inhuman smoothness of his flesh, the faint cracks along his cheeks like old ice thawing and refreezing. Those blue eyes were worse, though. Deep and empty, yet filled with a kind of patient hunger, as if Jon were nothing more than a particularly interesting log thrown onto a fire that would eventually consume all. The White Walkers shifted, their spears angling toward Jon. Rhaegal snarled, snapping at them, teeth closing around one of the tall figures and crushing it in a spray of frost and shattered armor. The others fell back a pace. They had learned to fear dragon teeth, if nothing else. Above, Drogon descended like a black shadow spilling across the canopy, branches snapping beneath the force of his passing. Daenerys Targaryen clung to his back, eyes locked on the Night King. Her hair was wild, cheeks flushed with cold and anger. She looked less like a queen and more like some avenging spirit out of old Nan's stories. "Dracarys!" she shouted. Fire poured from Drogon's jaws, a torrent of red gold that turned the snow beneath it instantly to steam. It engulfed the Night King and the White Walkers nearest him, a boiling inferno that lit the godswood like dawn. The heart tree's pale face glowed red, blotted out by the blaze. The heat was so intense that Jon had to turn his face away, raising his arm to shield his eyes. Rhaegal squinted and roared in defiance of the rival flame. For a heartbeat, 2-3, Jon dared to hope. This time, the fire was closer. This time, the Night King had no time to prepare, no distance, no lake of ice to buffer him. Even if dragon flame could not unmake him, could it not at least slow him, weaken him, crack the ice of his being? When the fire died, the Night King still stood. Steam curled around him, rising off his armor in thick, twisting tendrils. Some of the ornate plates had blackened, hairline fractures running through them like spiderweb cracks in glass. His pale skin had taken on a faint, unhealthy sheen, as if partially melted and refrozen. Daenerys stared down at him, eyes wide with something like desperation. Jon heard Bran's voice again, thin and strained. Together, the Night King lifted his hand. The dead in the godswood began to rise. Men Theon had fought alongside moments ago jerked and twitched, fingers digging into the slush as they dragged themselves upright once more. Wights that had been smashed by dragon claws reassembled piecemeal, torsos crawling across the ground to attach themselves to new sets of legs. One Ironborn who had died with his eyes fixed on the heart tree now turned those same eyes on Theon, empty of everything but the Night King's will. "No," Theon whispered. He stepped between them and Bran, spear braced. The Night King took another step forward. His gaze swept briefly over Jon, over Daenerys, over the dragons, then settled once more on Bran. Jon lunged. Longclaw's Valyrian steel edge hissed through the air, aimed at the Night King's neck. The ancient creature moved with inhuman speed, twisting aside so that the blade cut through nothing but the trailing edge of his armor. Jon's momentum carried him past, his boots slipping in the bloody snow. The Night King's hand closed around Jon's throat. It was like being gripped by winter itself. Jon's breath froze in his lungs. His vision narrowed. Ice crept along the edges of his sight. Somewhere distant, he heard Daenerys scream his name. The air changed again. Sudden, blistering heat as Drogon swooped lower, ready to bathe them all in fire if it meant freeing Jon. "No!" Bran's voice cracked like a whip. "Wait!" The Night King turned his head toward the dragon, considering. In that heartbeat of distraction, Theon acted. He threw himself forward with a hoarse cry, spear leveled like a lance. The point drove into the Night King's side, slipping between plates of armor, sinking deep into whatever lay beneath. For a moment, Theon thought he had done it. Thought he had found the crack, the flaw, the mortal core inside the immortal shell. The Night King turned his head slowly to look at him. Theon saw his own reflection in those blue eyes. A small man, dirty and shaking, spear buried to the haft in a monster's ribs. Then the Night King seized the shaft and snapped it in two. The force of the breaking sent Theon staggering. The Night King's hand lashed out, fingers like claws. Theon felt something tear in his chest. He flew backward, striking the base of the heart tree. The impact drove the air from his lungs. The world exploded in white. He slid down the trunk, leaving a smear of red on the pale bark. "Bran!" he gasped. Bran's eyes focused on him with effort. "You were a good man," he said. "Even when you did not know it." Theon tried to answer, but blood filled his mouth. He slumped sideways, still clutching the broken length of spear. The Night King released Jon, letting him drop to his knees in the snow. Frost rimed Jon's beard. His skin had gone a sickly shade of pale. He tried to lift Longclaw again, but his arms trembled. The dead closed in, forming a circle, waiting for their master's final gesture. Bran's head lolled back against the heart tree, eyes half-lidded. His lips moved. "Now," he whispered again, but this time the word carried farther. It echoed in the ravens wheeling overhead. It echoed in the dragon's shuddering lungs. It echoed down through the hidden passageways of Winterfell, along the stones Arya Stark's boots were pounding. She burst from a concealed door at the edge of the Godswood, the cold hitting her like a wall. For a moment the scene stole her breath. The dead in a ring, Jon on his knees, Theon crumpled, Bran beneath the heart tree, the Night King looming like the axis around which the whole nightmare turned. She had imagined leaping at him from the shadows, dagger ready. Melisandre's words burned in the back of her mind. "Blue eyes that are not for you." "Jon," Bran said, his voice suddenly clear. The Night King took another step toward him. Drogon roared, hovering just above the treetops, wings beating furiously to keep from crushing the entire Godswood. Daenerys leaned forward, her face a mask of terrible determination. "Dracarys!" she screamed again. "Wait!" Jon choked, forcing the word past frozen lips. He dragged himself to his feet, Longclaw in hand. His joints felt filled with ice, but he moved anyway, one step, then another, placing himself between the Night King and Bran. The Night King regarded him without expression. Bran's eyes locked on Jon's. "Strike when he breaks," Bran said. Jon did not know what that meant. He raised Longclaw anyway. Narration prompt 9. The world became fire and ice. Drogon's flame poured down in a tightened cone, narrower than before, focused not on the broad sweep of the Godswood but on a single point, the Night King's tall, frozen form. Daenerys Targaryen leaned with the dragon's movement, guiding him with knees and hands and a will sharpened by loss. The fire roared so loud that it drowned out her own voice. Jon Snow felt the heat slam into his back like a physical blow. For an instant he thought his furs would ignite. The air seared his lungs. Every instinct in him screamed to throw himself aside, to escape the oncoming inferno. He did not move. The Night King lifted his arms as if to embrace the flame. The fire hit him full on, wrapping him in a pillar of orange and gold. Snow at his feet vaporized, turning to a cloud of steam that billowed outward. The White Walkers nearest him staggered back, armor glimmering cherry red for an instant before the unnatural cold within them quenched it. Through the wavering heat, Jon saw it. Cracks appearing along the Night King's armor, racing like spiderweb fractures, the pale flesh beneath blackening and blistering. His ice-blue eyes narrowed, the first true sign of strain Jon had ever seen in that carved, inhuman face. For the first time, the Night King stepped back. He did not burn as other things burned. He did not melt, but the combined fury of dragon flame and the old, strange wills moving through the godswood, Bran's mind in the ravens, the whispering of the heart tree's sap, the very memory of the first men's blood spilled here, worked on him in ways that even he had not fully foreseen. He faltered. Bran's voice crashed through Jon's skull like a bell. Now! Jon pushed forward into the heat. He felt his eyebrows singe, felt his skin blister along the exposed edges of his face, but the fire parted around him at the last moment, bending as if some invisible hand cupped it. He emerged from the edge of the blaze with Longclaw raised high, his outline briefly that of a man made of shadow and light. The Night King turned toward him. His movements were slower now, joints stiffening as the extremes of heat and cold warred within him. Frost cracked along his neck with a dry, splintering sound. Jon brought Longclaw down with everything he had left. The Valyrian steel bit through armor already weakened by fire. It carved into the Night King's shoulder at an angle, shearing through frozen bone and whatever strange essence lay beneath. A sound like shattering glass thundered through the godswood. The Night King staggered, his left arm hanging useless, shards of ice breaking off and tumbling to the ground. His mouth opened in a soundless cry. Frost exploded outward from the wound, racing across Jon's blade and up his arms, biting deep into flesh. Jon gritted his teeth and pushed harder, driving the sword deeper. The Night King's remaining hand shot up, fingers closing around Longclaw's blade. The impact jolted down Jon's arms, nearly tearing the sword from his grip. The blue fire in the creature's eyes flared wildly. For a heartbeat, they were locked there. Man and monster, steel and ice, fire raging around them. The universe narrowed to the place where the blade met the frozen core of the Night King's being. Then Drogon's flame surged, as if some dam had broken. The fire licked along Longclaw, pouring into the wound Jon had made, seeking the cracks, the weaknesses. Daenerys screamed something wordless, driving the dragon harder, closer. The Night King's armor exploded. Shards of ice blasted outward, slicing through whites and White Walkers alike. The nearest of his lieutenants shattered on the spot, their bodies blowing apart in sprays of frost. The shockwave knocked Jon backward. He hit the snow-hard, vision spinning. The Night King stood at the center of the maelstrom, his form flickering. Lines of light raced along his skin, tracing ancient patterns like the weirwood's carved face, but in reverse. The blue in his eyes guttered, then flared, then dimmed again. For an instant, something like a human expression passed over his features. Shock, perhaps, or the memory of it. He reached out a hand toward Bran, fingers trembling. Bran's eyes were open now, fully present. He stared back at the Night King with a calm that seemed almost cruel. "It's time," Bran said softly. "Your story ends here." The Night King took one more step. Riegel's roar shook the godswood as he lunged, jaws closing around the Night King's legs. For a heartbeat, Jon thought the dragon meant to swallow him whole. Instead, Riegel clamped down and held, claws digging into the frozen earth, wings straining. The Night King was pinned. Drogon's fire narrowed again, a focused lance that drove directly into the wound at his shoulder, into the cracks spreading across his chest. Longclaw, still embedded within him, channeled the heat deeper, carrying it like a conductor into the very core. The Night King screamed. It was not a sound made for human ears. It was the shriek of glaciers calving, of 1,000 winter winds condensed into a single, agonized howl. The dead in the godswood convulsed, hands clawing at their own faces. The White Walkers clutched at their chests where faint blue stones shuddered beneath armor. Then the Night King shattered. He burst apart in a storm of ice shards and blue fire, the pieces dissolving into steam and frost before they hit the ground. Longclaw fell with a dull thud into the churned snow. Its blade rhymed with frost that began to melt almost immediately. Regal snapped at empty air, swallowing nothing but vapor. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, all at once, the whites collapsed. Bodies that had been surging forward only moments before went slack, joints loosening, strings cut. They tumbled into the snow in heaps, limbs tangled. The dead men Theon had fought alongside fell again, this time with their eyes truly empty, no unnatura. A light behind them, across the battlefield beyond the walls, the same collapse rippled outward. The tide of the dead turned instantly to a sea of corpses, motionless. The unnatural storm above Winterfell began to unravel, the snow easing, the wind shifting back to something that felt like ordinary winter rather than the malice of an ancient thing. Bran exhaled, long and slow. Jon pushed himself up onto his knees, chest heaving. His arms shook violently as he reached for Longclaw, fingers brushing the familiar hilt. The metal was painfully hot from the fire and strangely cold from the ice. He winced but curled his hand around it anyway. He looked up. The space where the Night King had stood was empty. Only Theon Greyjoy's body slumped against the heart tree, snow already beginning to dust his hair. The broken spear lay across his lap, the splintered end stained dark. Jon staggered to his feet and crossed to him. He knelt and laid a hand gently on Theon's shoulder. The flesh was cooling. Theon's eyes stared sightlessly up at the branches, as if seeking something beyond them. "You bought us a heartbeat," Jon said quietly. "We made it count." Bran watched them both, his expression grave. "He came home," Bran said. "In the end." Jon nodded. Above them, Drogon circled lower, his massive body casting a moving shadow across the godswood. Daenerys leaned forward, searching the scene with wide eyes, her chest heaving. When she saw Jon standing, saw Bran alive, something in her posture loosened. Then she looked beyond the godswood, toward Winterfell's main yard and the fields beyond, where tens of thousands of corpses lay silently in the snow. Her jaw set. Narration prompt 10. Dawn came grudgingly. The sky lightened from black to bruised purple, then to a thin gray that did little to lift the ruin below. Winterfell's walls still stood, but sections were scorched black where dragonfire had licked them. One tower had collapsed entirely, a jagged heap of stone and timber. The great field outside the castle had become a frozen graveyard, littered with bodies. Human, animal, and the strange, unnaturally preserved dead that had fallen with their master. Men and women moved among them like ghosts, searching for faces they knew. Sometimes they found them, sometimes they did not. Sometimes it was better that way. In the courtyard, a rough triage had been set up. The wounded lay on blankets or bare earth, wrapped in what furs could be spared. Healers moved from one to the next, hands stained with blood. The air was thick with the smells of smoke, sweat, and the copper tang of iron. Daenerys Targaryen stood near the steps of the Great Hall, her cloak torn and sooty, her hair half burned from where flying embers had caught it. She did not seem to notice. Her gaze swept the chaos, counting silently, weighing. For every live body her eyes passed over, she seemed to see two that did not move. Jon Snow came to stand beside her. He had had his burns bandaged, but his face was still raw in places, a patchwork of reddened skin and peeling blisters. Longclaw hung at his hip. He looked older than he had yesterday, as if the few hours since the battle had carved long, hard lines into his features. "It's over," he said. "For now," Daenerys replied. "The Night King is dead. His army with him." Jon glanced out toward the field. "We did what we came here to do." "We did," she agreed. "And in doing so, we lost half of what we had." She did not say whose half she meant, the North's men or her own unsullied and surviving Dothraki. It hardly mattered. The dead had not cared for banners. "They will sing of this," Jon murmured, almost to himself. "Of what we did here." Daenerys's mouth flattened. Songs do not feed the living. He looked at her sharply. This is not the end, Jon, she said. Cersei Lannister sits on a throne built from the swords of men who thought themselves conquerors. She watched us bleed in the snow while she stayed warm in her palace. She will not surrender because the dead are gone. She will see only weakness in what we have spent. Jon sighed. We'll have this talk another time. Today we bury our dead. She did not argue, but the knowledge hung between them like a drawn blade. They moved together through the courtyard, speaking to the men they could, lending their presence where it seemed to soothe or at least distract. Grey Worm sat on a low wall, a bloody bandage around his thigh, his face unreadable. Missandei hovered near him, touching his shoulder now and then as if to reassure herself that he still breathed. Brienne of Tarth leaned on her sword near a pile of bodies being sorted into lines, her armor dented and smeared. Jaime Lannister stood not far from her, his golden hand blackened, his real one bandaged. Their eyes met briefly. Something unspoken passed between them. Sansa Stark appeared on the steps, hair unbound now, face pale with exhaustion. She had not gone to the crypts for long. The screams had dragged her back to the surface, to coordination and command. Her eyes met Daenerys's across the yard, cool and measuring. Neither woman inclined her head. Arya Stark did not stand with any of them. She walked the field. The snow crunched beneath her boots, stained brown and pink in patches where blood had melted it. Bodies lay as they had fallen, some in twisted heaps, some in eerie near-sleeping poses. She saw men she had trained beside, old women who had carried bread to the walls, boys who had lied about their age to be allowed a spear. She had killed her share of wights, blades flashing, each strike precise and economical. The dragonglass dagger and spear Gendry had made for her were smeared with black ichor that did not freeze. Even now, sweat had dried on her skin, leaving her chilled to the bone. She had taken a cut across the arm at some point, a shallow gash she had not bothered to bind yet. The Night King's army had fallen without her. Melisandre's words echoed in her mind. The blue eyes are not for you. Arya crouched beside a girl no older than she had been when she had first fled King's Landing. The child's hair was braided in a northern style. Her hands still clutched a broken spear. Her throat had been ripped out. Her eyes stared up at the sky, filmed over with frost. You did well, Arya said softly. You stood your ground. No one answered. There was no one left to. She closed the girl's eyes. Further out, near the place where the Dothraki charge had broken, she saw a mound of horse corpses, their bodies piled together where they had fallen. Flies would come when the air warmed, if it ever did. For now only ravens circled, watchful, landing now and then to pick cautiously at exposed flesh. The ravens felt different, sharper somehow. Took her a moment to realize why. Bran, she thought, watching still. Do you see me? She asked the sky. A single raven tilted its head, black eyes unreadable, then launched itself into the air. She did not know whether that was answer or coincidence. When she finally turned back toward Winterfell, the first funeral pyres were being built. Men hacked at fallen trees with numb hands, dragging trunks into rough circles. Bodies were being laid out on piled wood, faces covered with cloth where loved ones had been able to find them. Arya stopped at the edge of one such pyre. Jorah Mormont lay there, arms folded over his chest, sword resting atop them. Daenerys stood nearby, her face carved into something hard and clean by grief. She did not cry. Her eyes were too dry for that, too focused. Grief had burned out something inside her and left only resolve. Arya's gaze moved on. Another pyre, this one smaller. Beric Dondarrion, what was left of him, had been arranged as neatly as could be managed. Thuras was long dead, but someone had remembered the way of their god. They had placed Beric's hands over his heart, fingers interlaced, as if he were at rest at last. Sandor Clegane sat on a half-broken barrel nearby, his posture slouched, his face ashen. Both of his hands were bandaged. His eyes flicked to Arya as she approached, then away again. You lived, she said. Disappointing, isn't it? He rasped. Did he? He burned. The hound's mouth twisted. Didn't get up again. Your red woman walked out into the snow and never came back either, if you're wondering. Shed her bloody necklace. Turned to dust. Just like that. He snapped his fingers, the sound muffled by cloth. Lot of good it did any of us. Arya looked at Barrack's still face. He bought me time. You both did. Sandor shrugged one shoulder. Priest said you had a part to play. Looks like he was wrong about which part. Was he? Arya asked quietly. Sandor did not answer. She moved on, leaving him with his ghosts. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, a weak disk behind thin, colorless clouds, the pyres were ready. Wood creaked under the weight of so many bodies. The air grew thick with the smell of pitch and cold ash. Jon Snow said the words for the north. Daenerys said them for her people. Sansa spoke for the Starks of Winterfell, her voice steady even when it cracked. Men and women listened with bowed heads, some weeping openly, others with dry, too bright eyes. Arya listened, but the words washed over her. She could not shake the feeling that this victory, immense and terrible as it was only the first cut in a larger wound. The dead who had come from the north had been an honest enemy. They had wanted everything and would have taken it in the open, with cold and claw and inexorable numbers. Cersei Lannister would not be so honest. Her face rose in Arya's mind, unbidden. The calm mask she had worn in the throne room, the slight curve of her lips as she ordered men's deaths with a sip of wine. Brown hair, pale skin, eyes like shards of green glass. Eyes that had watched Ned Stark beheaded. Eyes that had watched wildfire engulf the September of Baelor. Green eyes. Arya stood at the edge of the main pyre, the dragonglass dagger heavy in her hand. The flames had not been lit yet. All it would take was a torch and a breath, and the bodies of those who had stood between the living and the dead would turn to smoke and ash, rising into the gray sky. She let her fingers tighten around the hilt. This wasn't my kill, she murmured, barely more than a breath. But the list isn't finished. Somewhere deep inside, in the place the House of Black and White had tried to hollow out and fill with nothing, something hard and bright remained. It was not the cold justice of the faceless men, who believed all deaths were equal. It was a narrower thing, sharper, forged in the fires of her own losses. Names: Cersei Lannister, Ser Gregor Clegane, others old and new. The Night King had fallen to dragon and steel and the strange, tangled magic of the old gods and the new. She had not been the knife that struck his heart, and perhaps, as Melisandre had said, it had never belonged to her. But there was another heart beating still in the south, another kind of winter wrapped in gold and red. There would be time enough to mourn, time enough to burn and bury and drink to the memory of the dead. Time enough for councils and quarrels, for Jon and Daenerys and Sansa and the rest to argue over thrones and crowns and the shape of the world to come. Arya Stark had already begun to think of the road, the sails, the faces she might wear in a city of red stone and whispering alleys, the echo of green eyes widening in shock as a blade found flesh. A torch touched the nearest pyre. Flame rushed along the oiled wood, climbing, devouring. Heat washed over her face, driving back the chill. Sparks flew up into the gray, carrying with them the last traces of the men and women who had stood here. Arya watched until the smoke blurred her vision. Then she turned away from the fire, her shadow stretching long across the snow, and walked back toward Winterfell's walls. Narration Prompt 11. Chapter 2: The List Reforged. The Great Hall of Winterfell had never felt so full and so empty at once. They had brought in extra tables from storage, old scarred planks that had seen better feasts in kinder winters. Benches were jammed close together, men squeezed shoulder to shoulder, cloaks bunched and damp boots steaming in the smoky warmth. The air was thick with smells. Roasting meat, spilled ale, sweat, the copper tang of blood that no amount of scrubbing could quite take from the stones. At the high table, beneath the carved direwolves, Jon Snow sat between Sansa Stark and Daenerys Targaryen. To Arya's eyes, it looked like a noose. Sansa had chosen her place carefully. She wore a dark gray gown trimmed with white fur, her hair braided and coiled, the direwolf pin at her shoulder catching the firelight. Her back was straight, her hands folded lightly on the table when they were not lifting a cup. She said little, but her eyes missed nothing. Beside her, Daenerys looked almost as pale as the snow outside. The queen's white fur cloak was draped over the shoulders of a dress once fine, now singed and stained at the edges. Her silver hair, half burnt and hastily rebraided, gave her a wild, uneven look, as if the dragon she rode had decided to leave its mark. Her violet eyes flicked restlessly between the faces turned up toward her, weighing each one. Jon sat between them in plain leathers, his burned skin bandaged and raw where it showed above his collar. Longclaw leaned against his chair. He looked like a man who had survived drowning and still tasted river water in his lungs. Arya had wedged herself on a bench near one of the thick wooden pillars, close enough to see and hear the high table, not so close as to be noticed by those seated there. She shared space with a group of battered northern soldiers, one armored shoulder pressed against a man from the Bar-Rollins, the other touching a spear-lean youth whose hands trembled whenever laughter grew too loud. There was laughter now and then, nervous, explosive, too bright. It came in waves, rising from one corner of the hall and then receding, leaving behind its quieter cousins. The low murmur of voices, the clank of tankards, the occasional muffled sob. Someone had found a half-drunk singer and pushed him toward the front with a battered lute. His fingers fumbled at the strings, producing something that might have been a song if the hall had been less full of ghosts. First, no one ate. The bread sat untouched in its baskets. The meat cooled on its platters. Men stared at the food as if they had forgotten what to do with it. Many of them had lived through nights when they had expected never to be hungry again because they would be dead, and now the return of appetite felt like an insult. Eventually, the old instincts asserted themselves. Men started to reach, knives cut into joints, cups were filled and refilled. A roar rose from one corner as a group from the Karstark lands toasted their dead in a way that sounded more like a challenge than a remembrance. Jon rose slowly. The hall quieted, not to silence. There were too many wounded for that, but enough that his voice carried. "We are here," he said. "They are not." It was not the start of a speech, not as lords were taught to give them. Arya's lips twitched despite herself. Jon sounded the way he always had when he was most honest. Uncomfortable with his own voice, as if it belonged to someone else. "They came for all of us," he went on. "For your children and mine. For the ones who never learned a sword and the ones who've carried steel since they could walk. Dead men from beyond the wall, dead men from our own barrows. They wanted a world with no songs at all." He paused. Men shifted, glanced at one another. "But we are here," Jon repeated, "because we stood together. Free folk and Northmen, Southerners and men from the narrow sea. We stood with the Dragon Queen who brought fire when we had none left. With the Unsullied who held when others broke. With the Dothraki who rode into the dark so the rest of us had time to light our fires." He looked sideways at Daenerys. The queen's profile tightened, but she inclined her head a fraction. "There will be time to count the cost," Jon said. "Tonight we remember their names, and we drink to the fact that we still have tongues to speak them." He lifted his cup. "To the living," he said, "and to the dead who bought our dawn." A rough chorus echoed him. "To the living, to the dead." Arya drank because everyone else did. The ale tasted dull. She set the cup down and let her eyes roam. Ghost lay at the end of the high table, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. One ear was torn, a jagged notch where something had ripped it open. He looked up when Jon sat, red eyes focusing for a heartbeat, then settled again. Tormund Giantsbane boomed laughter somewhere down the hall, slamming his cup down hard enough to slop ale onto the table. Beside him, Gendry sat straighter than Arya had ever seen him, his new doublet a little too fine for his shoulders, as if he had borrowed the idea of a lord rather than the clothes. Davos Seaworth leaned against a pillar not far from her, cup in hand, watching it all with the weary amusement of a man who had lived through too many victories that felt like defeats. On the high table, Daenerys rose. Her voice, when it came, was thin at first, hoarse from smoke and shouting, but it strengthened as she spoke, the familiar cadence of command settling into place like a mantle. "You named him king in the north once," she said, nodding toward Jon. "I have seen him fight for you. I have seen him die for you." A murmur swept through the hall at that, surprised and uneasy. "I have seen him ride a dragon through a storm to strike down the thing that would have killed us all." Jon shifted, uncomfortable. Arya watched Sansa watch him, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, you honor him with your loyalty," Daenerys said, "as my people honor me with theirs. Tonight we drink not as separate banners, but as one." Arya could feel Sansa's jaw tightening even from where she sat. "And we give honor," Daenerys continued, lifting her cup toward the lower tables, "to those who stood with us when they did not have to those who owed us nothing, yet gave us everything." Her gaze found Gendry, tucked near Tormund's broad shoulder. "Gendry," she called. "Son of Robert Baratheon." The hall stirred, heads turned. Gendry jerked as if someone had kicked his bench. He stood slowly, cheeks flushing. "Your Grace," he said, voice rough. "You are Robert's son," Daenerys said. "He took my family's throne, killed my brother, and tried to kill me before I was born. His rebellion burned a continent." Gendry's face tightened. Arya's fingers closed around the rim of her cup. "And yet," Daenerys went on, "you fought for me. You stood here against the dead as bravely as any man whose bloodline was loyal to my house. I will not hold a father's sins against a son who never knew him." She raised her voice. "From this day forth, Gendry, son of Robert, is no longer a bastard. I name him Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End, Lord of the Stormlands, rightful in name as he has been in deed." The sound that followed was not quite a cheer, not quite a gasp, but something of both. Gendry stared up at her, mouth working soundlessly, eyes wide. Tormund thumped him on the back so hard that he almost fell over. Sansa's lips pressed into a thinner line, the smallest flicker of displeasure crossing her face. The North did not forget that a title could be a gift or a leash. Arya watched the Queen smile as the hall responded, some with real enthusiasm, some with polite noise, some with silent, wary eyes. It was a clever move, she thought. Make a Baratheon. Make him owe it all to you. Tie the Stormlands to your cause with a single word. Cersei Lannister would have done the same. The thought unsettled her, like a shard of bone caught in her throat. Narration prompt 12. The night lengthened. Cups were drained and refilled. The singer remembered more of his songs as the wine loosened his tongue, and others joined in, some in key, most not. A pair of wildlings started an arm wrestling contest that toppled an entire bench. Wounds were forgotten for a while. Laughter came easier, or at least louder. Arya remained where she was, half in shadow, the noise of celebration like waves crashing against the shore of her thoughts. Gendry found her eventually. He came weaving between benches, still moving as if the floor might suddenly give way beneath him. Men clapped his shoulder, shouted his new name, asked him for promises he did not yet know how to give. His cheeks were flushed. His eyes glittered, not only from drink. "Arya," he said when he finally reached her, breathless, as if he had been running instead of walking. "Did you hear?" She stared at him, hard not to, with all the shouting. He laughed, awkward and delighted and frightened all at once. "She made me a lord. Me, Gendry the bastard. Gendry the smith. Lord of Storm's End." The words sounded strange on his tongue. "Can you believe it?" "Yes," Arya said. He blinked. "You can. You're Robert's son," she said. "He took the throne with a warhammer and a grudge. You took on whites with a hammer you forged yourself. Seems about right." He grinned at that, some of the wild joy in him smoothing into something steadier. "You always did have a way of putting things. Someone has to," she replied. He hesitated, then slid onto the bench beside her, crowding her a little against the pillar. The men on her other side shifted to make room. one giving Gendry a respectful nod. Lords, even newly minted ones, made people move. "Arya," Gendry said again, softer now. She turned to him, eyebrow raised. He swallowed. "I've been thinking about what comes next, after this." He gestured vaguely at the hall, the feast, the heap of exhausted men and women. "After the dead. What makes you think there is an after?" Arya asked. He flinched, then shook his head. "Don't say that. We beat them, didn't we? The Night King is dead. Jon killed him with the dragons and brands, whatever Bran did. We're still here. There has to be an after." Her mind flashed back to Theon's body beneath the heart tree, to the way Jon had staggered up from the snow, skin blistered, breath ragged, to the sound of the Night King shattering like ice under a hammer, to the way the storm had fallen suddenly silent, and the dead with it. She exhaled. "Maybe," she said. Gendry leaned closer. "You know what I was before? Who I was? I thought I'd die in Flea Bottom, never knowing my name meant anything. Now I've got a castle in the Stormlands I've never seen and a title that feels like a shirt that doesn't quite fit. I don't know how to wear it. I don't know how to be a lord." He licked his lips. "But I know I don't want to do it alone." Arya's stomach tightened. "Arya Stark," he said, the words tumbling out now as if he feared they would turn to smoke if he waited. "Will you come with me? To Storm's End. Be there when I try to make sense of it. You don't have to be a lady if you don't want. 7 hells, you'd probably hit anyone who called you that too often. But you could... We could..." He trailed off, searching her face. She watched him. There was a time, in the forge at Dragonstone, when she might have laughed and said yes, if only to see the look on his face. There was a time, in the dark after they had first come together, when she had thought about roads that did not lead to war and lists, about days spent in sunlit courtyards where the biggest decision was which horse to ride. That time felt far away now. "Gendry," she said quietly, "I'm not meant for castles. You could be," he insisted. "You can be whatever you want. You killed men in the Riverlands with a stolen sword. You crossed the narrow sea to learn from the faceless men. You can learn to." "I don't want to learn." She shook her head. "I'm not a lady. I'll never be one. And lords' wives sit and sew and smile and watch their husbands die for other people's battles. They don't have to," he argued. "Not if you." She reached out and took his hand. Startled them both. His skin was rough, calloused in ways that no title could scrub away. No matter how many rings he wore, his palms would always remember the weight of a hammer. "You're a good man," she said. "A better one than most I've met. You'll make a better lord than your father ever did a king." "Arya, but my road doesn't lead to Storm's End." She released his hand. "There are names still in my head that haven't gone quiet. I thought..." Her throat tightened around the thought of blue eyes and icy flesh. "I thought the Night King would be one of them, but he wasn't. He never was. He was death. Not my death. Not my kill." Gendry frowned, not understanding. "Cersei Lannister," Arya said, almost to herself. The name tasted of ash. Gendry's eyes widened. "She's in King's Landing, with the Golden Company, with the Iron Fleet." He lowered his voice, glancing around as if the Queen might hear his treasonous tone even from across the hall. "You're not thinking of... She has green eyes," Arya murmured. Melisandre's voice slid through her memory like a knife. "Brown eyes, green eyes, blue eyes. The Hound once called my list a child's mistake," she went on. "A bedtime story I told myself. But the people whose names I said died. Walder Frey, Meryn Trant, Polliver. Names from the Trident and King's Landing and 1,000 little wrongs. I crossed them off one by one." "Arya," Gendry said, "you don't have to." "She's still on it," Arya said. "Cersei Lannister, Ser Gregor Clegane. I thought the dead would be the last thing I'd face. But they were honest. They didn't lie. They just came." She looked up at the high table, where Daenerys and Sansa sat like winter and summer pressed back to back. "Cersei will lie. She'll let us bleed ourselves dry and then take what's left." Gendry followed her gaze. then looked back at her. Let the queen deal with her. With the dragons. With the armies. You've done enough. Arya smiled then, a small, crooked thing that felt strange on her face. When have I ever let anyone else finish something I started? She asked. He sagged, shoulders dropping. I had to ask, he said quietly. I know. She nudged his shoulder with her own. And I'm glad you did. It means you're braver than your father ever was, too. He laughed, a weak, rueful sound. Maybe I'll name a sword after you, he muttered. Lady Arya, the blade that says no. Name a boat instead, she said. Swords die too often. He looked at her one last long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. Then he nodded and rose, drawn back toward the place where his new title waited to be tried on again. Arya watched him go, then turned her attention back to the high table. Daenerys was speaking quietly to Tyrion Lannister now. The hand's sharp features were drawn in a frown, his fingers worrying at the stem of his cup. Sansa listened without appearing to listen, her eyes on some distant point beyond the queen's shoulder. A raven arrived before the feast's end. It came through one of the high windows, feathers ruffled, eyes bright. The bird swooped low over the tables, scattering a few startled cries, then landed on the back of a chair near the high table. Tyrion rose to take the message from its leg. His expression tightened as he read. Bad news? Daenerys asked, voice low. News, Tyrion said. From the south. From King's Landing. Arya leaned forward, the rest of the hall receding to a distant hum. Narration prompt 13. Tyrion's voice was not built to command a hall, but the room quieted anyway as he straightened the parchment. The seal of the hand of the queen broken and cast aside on the table. Old habits still clung to him. He cleared his throat before he began, as if addressing a smaller, more civil audience. From our friends in King's Landing, he said. Those who still dare to call themselves such. The word friends hung in the air like smoke. He scanned the lines quickly, his mismatched eyes darting. Arya could see the moment he hit the worst of it by the flicker at the corner of his mouth. Well, Daenerys prompted. Tyrion lifted his head. It seems the news of our battle has reached the capital. Rumors travel quickly when they fly with the dead at their heels. His tone was dry, but there was a steely thread beneath it. The people have begun to flee the city. Too many bodies in one place make poor kindling when the wind is full of whispers. And what does my sister do? Jaime Lannister asked from his place further down the table, voice low. The gold of his hand glimmered in the firelight. What she always does, Tyrion said. She counts. She weighs. She chooses how best to make others pay for her fear. He read again. Cersei Lannister has closed the gates of King's Landing, he said. Orders have gone out. No one enters, no one leaves. The gold cloaks turn refugees away from the walls. The Golden Company have been stationed along the inner streets. Their commander has been given instructions to hold the city at all costs. At all costs, Sansa repeated, her voice flat. Rumor has it, Tyrion went on, that Qyburn has been busy as well. More scorpions have been built for the walls. Larger, better aimed. He has been seen often on the battlements, watching the sky, his mouth twisted. You have impressed them, your grace. They are afraid of your dragons. They should be, Daenerys said softly. Word has also reached them of our losses, Tyrion said, of how many men fell in the snow. The dead do not send ravens, but men who survive do. Cersei knows we are diminished. She has recalled Euron Greyjoy. The Iron Fleet now patrols Blackwater Bay. Jaime's jaw clenched. And what of the people? Jon asked. He had risen halfway from his chair without realizing it. Tyrion looked at him. For a heartbeat, the cynicism slipped. They are trapped, he said, between a queen who will not let them flee and a queen who will come with dragons. Between a lion and a dragon, pressed against stone. Daenerys's eyes had narrowed as he spoke. She means to use them, she said, bitter understanding dawning in her voice. She arms herself with my fear of harming innocents. She thinks I will flinch. She thinks you will burn them anyway, Sansa said, and that the world will call you monster while she hides behind their corpses. The quiet at the high table spread outward in concentric ripples. Men nearby leaned in, listening. Tyrion's fingers tightened on the parchment. He could not deny it. She has placed wildfire beneath the city before, he said. She burned the Great September rather than face judgment. She will not hesitate to repeat herself in some new fashion if it gives her an advantage. He met Daenerys's gaze. If we attack by air, she will make the streets a shield of flesh. If we attack by land, she will starve us, force us into a siege, and hope we turn on one another. Then we do not give her the choice, Daenerys said. It was a simple sentence. It sat on the table between them like a drawn dagger. How? Jon asked. Daenerys lifted her chin. We march south. We bring what remains of our forces and every ship we can find. We take Dragonstone as our staging ground. From there, we strike when and where we must. We give her an opportunity to surrender and spare her people. If she refuses, she let the thought hang unfinished. She will refuse, Sansa said. You know that. Daenerys's eyes burned. Then the blood is on her hands. The world won't see it that way, Tyrion murmured. They will see dragons burning a city. They will see fire and ash. Stories stick. He glanced toward Jon. Ask your brother. Jon did not answer. His eyes were distant, as if he saw the gods would again. The flash of blue flame, the way the Night King had shattered. Arya watched them from the hall, the words soaking into her like spilled wine into wood. Trapped, shield of flesh, fire and ash. She remembered the way Dragonflame had turned the dead to cinders. It had been beautiful in a terrible way. It would not be so beautiful when it turned women and children and old men to the same. Enough, Sansa said. This is not the place. Where else? Daenerys asked. Your hall, your people, my people. They deserve to know what comes next. They deserve to sleep without fearing that the roof above them will crack from the weight of your quarrels, Sansa replied. The words were soft, but the steel in them was unmistakable. Davos Seaworth stepped forward, from where he had been hovering between tables and wall. Lady Sansa is right, he said, addressing no one and everyone. We need rest. Men need to know they'll wake up tomorrow and not be marched back onto another field before their wounds scab over. We do not control when Cersei will move, Daenerys said. No, Davos agreed, but we can control whether we fall on each other before we reach her. He looked between Queen and Lady and King, his tired eyes steady. Give them this night, he said. We can plan on the morrow. Silence stretched. Then Sansa inclined her head. Once. As you wish, Daenerys said. The words were courteous. The tone was carefully not. She sat. Tyrion folded the parchment, slipping it into his sleeve. The raven, freed of its duty, hopped along the back of the chair and took flight, disappearing into the rafters. The hall tried to return to celebration, but something brittle had entered the air. Laughter came sharper now, conversations tighter, eyes flicking more often toward the high table. Arya slipped from her bench. No one stopped her as she crossed the hall, moving through the spaces between bodies with the unconscious grace of someone who had spent years learning how to be unseen. The noise muffled around her until it was nothing but a dull roar, like the sea heard through stone. She did not go to the high table. She did not go to Jon or to Sansa or to the Queen. She went outside. Narration prompt 14. The cold hit her like a hand. After the heat and noise of the hall, the courtyard felt almost holy. The torches along the walls burned low, their light a soft, wavering gold. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a sky that had cleared enough to show the faintest shimmer of green and purple high above, like bruises on the night. The pyres still smoldered outside the walls. Smoke curled into the air, carrying with it the last of the battle's dead. The wind shifted, bringing the smell to Arya's nose. She breathed it in without flinching. Arya, she turned. Sansa stood in the archway, cloak drawn tight, breath a pale cloud. "You left before the toasts were done," Sansa said, stepping down into the courtyard. "Lady Lyanna would have scolded you." "She'd scold me for breathing wrong," Arya said. Sansa's mouth twitched. True enough. They walked for a few paces in silence, boots crunching on packed snow. The noises from the hall were a muffled thrum behind thick stone, distant and almost irrelevant. "You heard," Sansa said at last. "About Cersei?" "Yes. She's always been good at choosing her ground," Sansa murmured, "weighing her enemies against one another. Let the wolves freeze in the north. Let the dragons bleed themselves dry against the dead. When the smoke clears, she means to be the only one left standing." "Dragons don't freeze," Arya said. "Everything breaks if you pull hard enough," Sansa replied, "or burn it long enough." They stopped near the well. Its stones rhymed with frost. Arya leaned against it, arms folded, watching her sister's profile. "You don't like her," Arya said. It was not really a question. "I don't trust her," Sansa corrected. "Liking has nothing to do with it. I don't trust Cersei. I don't trust Daenerys. I barely trust the men who have fought for us not to turn their cloaks when someone offers them more food or warmer castles." She sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere much older than her years. "Do you remember Father?" she asked. "How simple everything seemed when he sat in that hall. Justice was a straight line. The man who passed the sentence swung the sword. We thought the world worked that way." Arya remembered. She remembered blood on snow and the feel of Jon's cloak around her shoulders. Too big then. She remembered thinking that there were right answers, if only you were brave enough to choose them. "It doesn't," Sansa said. "Not anymore. Maybe not ever." "Cersei's never made anything simple," Arya said. No, Sansa's gaze drifted south, toward the unseen line where the land curved away. "She will sit her throne behind her walls and dare us to drag her down. If we don't, she'll call us cowards. If we do, she'll scream monster and point at the ashes." "The dead were honest," Arya said quietly. "They wanted us all. They didn't pretend otherwise." "That's the worst part," Sansa said. "Monster or hero, at least with the dead, you knew where you stood." They fell silent again, listening to the wind. "Jon will follow her," Arya said after a time. "The queen. He believes in her." "He believes in everyone," Sansa said. "He still thinks people are mostly decent if you give them the chance. That's why people die for him," Arya said. "They want to be worthy of what he sees. And why queens who have seen less kindness than he has will use that against him," Sansa added softly. Arya studied her sister's face. There were lines there now that had not been present when they had first been reunited. Fine etchings at the corners of her eyes, the faint mark of burdens carried. "What do you want?" Arya asked. Truly, Sansa's jaw worked. "For the North to survive," she said. "For the children in these halls to grow up without wondering which banner will be flying over them when they wake. For us not to trade one mad ruler for another." She met Arya's gaze. "I want the North to be free," she said. "We bent the knee because we needed her dragons against the dead. We are not dead." Her eyes hardened. "I will not trade Father's ghost for another chain." Arya thought of Daenerys atop Drogon, fire pouring from the dragon's jaws, of the way she had looked down at the Godswood, at Bran and Jon and the Night King, with that tight, fierce expression. "She didn't burn us," Arya said. "She could have. She needed us," Sansa replied. "Wait until she doesn't." For a moment, Arya saw it. Dragonfire over Winterfell, the roar of wings, stone turning to slag. It was a quick vision, gone almost as soon as it formed, but it left a cold taste. "I'm not saying she will," Sansa went on. "Only that she could. Men like Jon trust too easily. Women like Cersei trust no one. Women like Daenerys trust only themselves. Somewhere between them is the space where we're meant to live." She gave a humorless little laugh. "If we can." "You sound like you have a list of your own," Arya said. Sansa's eyes flickered. "Names don't fix anything," she said. Not really. The world doesn't magically become fairer when one man dies, or 10, or 100. It becomes fairer for the people they're not hurting anymore, Arya said. Sansa looked at her fully. You still have it, then? Your list? Yes. Who's left? Arya could have lied. She did not. Cersei Lannister, she said. Ser Gregor Clegane. A few scraps. Odds and ends. Faces flickered in her mind like candle flames. Nameless Lannister soldiers from the Riverlands. Men who had been cruel when they did not have to be. The world has killed some of them for me. I took care of the others. Sansa's expression was unreadable. Do you still think of it when you sleep? She asked. Do you whisper it before you close your eyes? Less, Arya said. But some names don't lie down. They sit up and stare at you in the dark. Cersei, Sansa repeated, almost tasting the word. You want her dead too, Arya said. Yes, Sansa said simply. But I want her to die in a way that saves us, not damns us. I want her to die in a way that doesn't turn any more of our brothers into monsters. She stepped closer, close enough that Arya could see the tiny, pale freckles across the bridge of her nose she had had as a child. Whatever you're thinking, Sansa said, be careful. We need you alive more than we need her dead. Arya thought of Melisandre's eyes, of the way the Red Woman had looked at her as if she were both weapon and prophecy. Brown eyes, green eyes, blue eyes. I don't know how to be careful, she said. Learn, Sansa replied, or at least don't be reckless alone. Arya huffed. Who said I'd be alone? Sansa's gaze flicked to the stable yard, where a large, hunched shape moved in the half-light, leading a horse. The hound has been sniffing around the stables since dusk, she said. If you're going south, he will be too, for his own reasons. His brother, Arya said. His monster, Sansa corrected. They stood together a moment more, two Stark girls under a sky that seemed too wide. Whatever you do, Sansa said at last, remember this, the North is watching. I am watching. Jon will see what he wants to see, but I will see what you do. So will Bran. Don't give me a reason to add your name to any list. For all the softness of her voice, Arya heard the warning. I won't, she said. She wasn't sure if it was a promise she could keep. Narration prompt 15. The castle did not sleep, not really. Even when the hall began to empty and the fires burned low, there were always footsteps in the corridors, always a muttered conversation in some alcove, always a raven shifting on a rooftop. Arya moved through it as easily as she had once moved through the tunnels beneath the Red Keep. The stones were different, the air colder, but the habits were the same. Men talked when they thought no one was listening. Doors that were supposed to be closed stayed ajar when someone was too tired to latch them. Secrets leaked like ale from cracked barrels. She heard the murmur of Tyrion's voice before she saw the light. It came from a small chamber near the base of one of the towers, a room used more often for quiet councils than for any public business. The door was not fully shut. A line of yellow candlelight traced the floor. You're assuming she'll give us any choice, Tyrion was saying. Cersei has never been one to meet her enemies in the open field unless she can stack the odds so heavily that the outcome is certain. And yet we must face her. Another voice replied, soft and precise. Lord Varys, the realm cannot endure a Lannister queen forever. She will bleed it dry, one tax, one cruelty at a time, until there is nothing left to rule. And you believe Daenerys is the balm for that wound, Tyrion said, not unkindly. A queen who has never known a day without war. A queen with dragons. There are no perfect choices, Varys said. You know that better than most. We do not choose between good and bad, only between bad and worse. Arya sidled closer, flattening herself against the wall just beside the crack of the door. She could see a sliver of the room. Tyrion's profile, the gleam of wine in his cup. Varys's bald head bent over the map strewn across the table, little carved lions and wolves and dragons marking points of interest. I am not blind to her tendencies, Varys said, choosing the word with care. I know what fire can do when it believes itself righteous, but I also know what Cersei will do if left alone. She has proven it again and again. There are people in the capital who remember the Mad King. There are fewer who still feel any loyalty to her. And yet they remain, Tyrion murmured, trapped between her pride and our purpose. Which is why she must be removed, Varys said. Quickly. Cleanly, if possible. Tyrion's laugh was dry. Cleanly. I had almost forgotten what that word tasted like. You were hand once, Varys said. You know that sometimes one death can prevent 1,000. Or justify them, Tyrion countered. He stared down at the map, at the carved lion perched atop King's Landing. If I had killed her when I fled, he said quietly, if I had turned back instead of running to Pentos, do you think the world would be better? Varys tilted his head. Perhaps for some, he said. Worse for others. Different. That is all. Useless, Tyrion muttered. There is a simpler truth, Varys said. As long as Cersei Lannister lives, there will be no peace. With or without Daenerys. With or without dragons. She will not share power. She will not surrender it. She will burn the city to the ground if she can sit on the last stone. Tyrion flinched, just enough that Arya saw the movement through the crack. We must hope someone reaches her before she reaches for the wildfire. Varys went on. Preferably someone with more sense than her brother. Jaime does what he thinks is right, Tyrion said. So does every butcher, Varys replied. Silence stretched. Tyrion's fingers drummed on the table. I can advise Daenerys, he said at last. I can beg her to spare the city. I can whisper in Jon's ear, in Sansa's. But in the end, if Cersei forces her hand, he shook his head. I know what fire looks like when it is tired of being denied. Varys's eyes were dark. Then perhaps it is not dragons we should be placing our faith in, he said softly. But knives. Tyrion glanced at him, startled. Not yours, Varys clarified. You are many things, my friend, but a subtle killer you are not. This is work for someone who knows how to move in shadows. Someone who is already dead in the eyes of the capital. Arya felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the cold seeping through the stone. You have anyone in mind? Tyrion asked. There are always whispers, Varys said. The girl who cut Walder Frey's throat. The wolf who walks in no one's face. Stories travel faster than ravens. Tyrion's mouth opened, then closed. She wouldn't do it for us, he said. Not for you. Not for Daenerys. She kills for herself. For her list. Then we must hope her list and our needs happen to align, Varys said. Arya stepped back, breath quiet. Hope, she thought. Strange thing to pin on a girl who learned to kill because no one would protect her. She slipped away from the door before anyone inside could decide to come out. Narration prompt 16. The Forge had always been Gendry's true hall. Titles and feasts and lords' words slid off him like water off steel. But give him iron and fire and something to shape, and he knew exactly who he was. Arya found him there long after the feast began to ebb, long after the laughter had grown hoarse. He had stripped back down to his undershirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, the lord's fine doublet flung carelessly over a peg. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cold outside, the heat of the coals turning the small stone building into its own little world. He swung the hammer with a rhythm that soothed and punished, each blow sending up a shower of sparks. The metal glowed red, then orange, slowly submitting to his will. You're supposed to be up in a tower somewhere, Arya said from the doorway, counting tapestries, ordering servants not to track mud on your floors. He started, then glanced over his shoulder. For an instant, the boy she had met at the crossroads all those years ago shone through the lines of strain and confusion. Couldn't sleep, he said. Thought I'd see if this lord business had knocked the strength out of my arms. Has it? She asked. He swung the hammer again, harder this time. Not yet. She stepped inside, letting the door fall half-closed behind her. The forge smelled of coal and hot metal, of old sweat and oil. It was oddly comforting. "What are you making?" she asked. He hesitated, then lifted the half-formed shape from the anvil with tongs, turning it so she could see. It was a long, narrow blade, not yet sharpened, its edges rough. "Dragonglass worked well enough against dead men," he said, "but steel still has its place. I thought," he trailed off, embarrassed, "I thought I might make something that suits what you are, not what I wanted you to be." She eyed the metal. "You're making me a sword? Not a lady's needle," he said. "Not a great sword either. Something in between. Something you can stab someone in the eye with and still parry a knight's blow if you have to." "I already have a sword," she said. "Two if you count the knife." "I know." He set the half-sword back on the anvil. "But steel remembers who made it. If you're going south, I want something of mine in your hand when you start killing queens." She stared at him. "Who said I was going south?" "You did," he said simply. "When you said no to Storm's End. When you said Cersei's name like you were tasting poison. When you walked out of that hall with murder in your eyes." He met her gaze, unflinching. "I know you, Arya," he said. "You don't sit still when there's someone left on your list." She did not deny it. "Storm's End will still be there when this is done," he said. "If we live, if anything does, I can learn to be a lord later. Right now, I remember how to make things that keep people from dying." "Sometimes people need to die," she said. "I know," he said, "but I'd rather it be the right ones." He lifted the hammer again, but Arya stepped forward and laid a hand on his forearm. "Keep it," she said, "for now. If I come back, you can put my name on the blade. If I don't," she shrugged, "find someone else who needs it." His jaw tightened. "Don't talk like that. I've died before," she said. "Or close enough. It's not so bad." "It's bad enough," he snapped. Then he exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Just please, don't go looking for death like it's some old friend come calling." "I'm not," she said. "I'm looking for Cersei Lannister." He huffed a humorless laugh. "Same thing." She let her hand fall. "Be the lord they need," she said. "If you can't have me, have them. Make sure your people don't starve when the snows melt and there's nothing left in the fields." "You talk like you're 100, he muttered. "I've seen more years than most," she said. "On the road, time stretches. You live 3 lives in 1 winter." He wanted to argue. She could see it. Instead, he set down the hammer and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "If you see her," he said. "If you get close." "Cersei?" Arya asked. "Careful you don't turn into her," he said. "Killing people because it's the only thing you know how to do." She thought of the boy she had shot through the throat in the Riverlands, because Polliver had told him to hold needle. Of the men she had poisoned at the twins because they had laughed when her mother died. "I'm not her," she said. "No," he agreed. "You've never killed for a throne." He picked up the hammer again, as if the conversation were an ingot he could pound into a different shape. "Go," he said, "before I say something stupid." "You already did," she replied, but she went. Narration prompt 17. The Godswood was quieter than ever at night. The snow muffled sound, turning footsteps into whispers. The heart tree's red leaves stirred now and then with no visible wind, as if moved by something older and deeper than air. Bran Stark sat where he had sat during the battle, his chair positioned beneath the carved face. He wore a thick fur across his lap, his hands resting atop it, fingers curled loosely. His eyes were half-lidded, focused on something only he could see. Arya stepped into the clearing as silently as she could, but his head turned toward her before she'd taken 3 paces. "You walk more quietly than you used to," he said. "I learned a few things," she replied. "So did I," he said. She sank into a crouch opposite him, then folded her legs under her, ignoring the bite of cold through her trousers. The snow made her breath visible between them, 2 small white clouds rising and fading. "You were listening," Bran said. "Always," she answered. "That's what Father used to say," Bran murmured, "when Mother accused him of being half a ghost even when he was sitting at table." I am listening. He was, Arya said, to things we never heard. Bran smiled faintly. I hear more now. She studied his face. There was an agelessness to it that unsettled her sometimes. He was her brother, but he was also other, something that wore his shape. Tell me what you hear, she said. He tilted his head back, looking up through the branches. Wings, he said. Always wings. Ravens, dragons, bats in caves, owls in distant trees, the hush of leaves in the summer aisles, the crash of ice far to the north where the wall once stood, men praying in strange tongues for things they will never get, women singing lullabies to children who will grow up to break themselves on other people's swords. Useful, she said dryly. It is, he said, if you learn to listen to the right parts. And what are the right parts? She asked. Depends on what you're trying to do, he said. Right now, you want to know if you should kill a queen. She stiffened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He looked at her fully now, the eerie distance in his gaze receding enough for her to see the boy beneath it. You think the dead should have been yours, he said. The Night King. You wanted to be the one to end him. I would have done it, she said. I know, he replied, but that wasn't your path. It would have knotted things, closed others. What things? She demanded. The ones that lead south, he said simply, to red stone and green fire, to a throne made of swords. Cersei, Arya said. Yes, he said it without hesitation. It made the hairs on her arms stand up. You see me there, she said, in King's Landing. I see many things, he said. Paths, not roads. Branches, not walls. On some, you never leave Winterfell. On some, you die here tonight in the snow. On some, you stand in a room with white walls and no windows and let strangers write their words about you in books. She frowned. That sounds like a terrible path. It is, he said. But the world needs all its worst paths as much as it needs its best. They give us something to turn away from. She shook her head. I'm not interested in your riddles, Bran. I want to know if killing her saves people, or just gives someone else an excuse to light a match. He was quiet for a long time. The city burns in many of the paths, he said at last. Sometimes by dragon, sometimes by wildfire, sometimes by men with torches when bread runs out, sometimes slowly, when no one notices until the smoke chokes them. And if she dies? Arya asked. In some paths, she dies and the city burns anyway, Bran said. In others, she dies and the fires go out. In some, she lives and something worse than her takes the throne. Worse than Cersei? Arya snorted. Hard to picture. Power doesn't care what face it wears, Bran said. It only cares that it can move people like pieces on a board. She thought of the map room, the carved lions and wolves and dragons, the way men like Tyrion and Varys and even Father had leaned over boards and called it strategy while elsewhere, people bled. Is she your queen? She asked him. Daenerys, he considered. She is a piece, he said. So is Jon. So are you. So is Cersei. So were the White Walkers once. So am I. He shrugged slightly. But pieces can choose to fall over sometimes, or roll off the board. You think I should roll towards Cersei's feet, she said. I think, Bran said slowly, that there is a room in the Red Keep where one life sits in front of many others. I think there is a knife in that room. I think that knife could be yours. And if I don't take it? She asked. Someone else will, he said. Or no one will. And dragons will do what they were made to do. She pressed her lips together. Melisandre said I'd shut green eyes, she muttered. I used to think she meant Joffrey. Then I thought maybe it didn't mean anything at all. Old women and their tricks. Sometimes their tricks are just other ways of seeing, Bran said. Prophecies don't decide. People do. He looked at her, really looked, as if seeing not the girl crouched in the snow but all the versions of her that might be. You've killed for vengeance, he said. You can kill for mercy too. Feels different, heavier sometimes, but it leaves the world a different shape behind you. Mercy for whom? She asked. For the ones who will never know you did it, he said. The children in Flea Bottom who will live to be old. The shopkeepers who won't burn in their beds when dragons scream over the city. The small folk who don't care which sigil flies over the red keep so long as they can eat. And for Cersei? Arya asked. Is there mercy in my knife for her? Bran's face was unreadable. For her, he said, there is only an ending. Narration prompt 18. They met in the war room at dawn, when the sky was still the color of old bruises and the fires in the hearths had only just been coaxed back to life. The table was already set when Arya slipped in, hugging the shadows by the door. Someone, probably Tyrion, had arranged the carved pieces with care. Dragons perched in the north, their wooden wings spread above Winterfell. Wolves clustered around them. South, a lion sat fat and complacent atop King's Landing. Tiny ships dotted the painted waters of Blackwater Bay. Daenerys stood at the head of the table, hands braced on the wood, eyes fixed on the lion. Jon stood across from her, his face still raw in patches, his hair damp from a hasty wash. Sansa took her place at one side, Davos at the other. Jaime hovered near the map's southern edge, his golden hand resting on the table, his real one curled at his side. Bran's chair sat a little apart, pushed close enough that he could see but not so close that he could easily reach the pieces. Tyrion, cup in hand even this early, cleared his throat. We have 3 main strengths left, he said, tapping the map with a finger. Dragons, the Unsullied, the North, the Dothraki. He hesitated. What's left of them are more scattered than not. Half my army is gone, Daenerys said, eyes still on the lion. More than half. Cersei lost nothing, Sansa said. She sat and waited while we bled. That ends, Daenerys said. We march south as soon as the wounded can be moved. The longer we wait, the more time she has to dig in, to build more scorpions, to starve her people into hating us before we ever arrive. And the more time our men have to remember they're human, Davos said quietly. Dragging them back onto the road before they can stand straight might win you a faster battle, Your Grace. It will also lose you their hearts. I'm not asking for their hearts, Daenerys said. Only their swords. Tyrion shifted. Hearts help, he said mildly. People fight better for someone they love than someone they fear. Cersei has ruled by fear for years, Daenerys snapped. Why should I be held to a kinder standard than she? Because you say you're better, Sansa said. Daenerys's eyes snapped to hers. The room tightened. Arya watched silent. Her gaze moved across the map, tracing roads she had traveled as a child. The King's Road snaking south, the crossroads in the fork of the Trident. She remembered mud on her boots, the smell of horse, the feel of needle at her hip. Felt like another lifetime. We can't storm the city without risking burning it to the ground, Jon said. We all know what Dragonfire can do. We've seen it. Daenerys drew herself up. I will not burn children, she said. I did not cross the narrow sea to become what my father was. Tyrion's shoulders eased a fraction. But if she uses them as shields, Daenerys went on, if she lines the walls with them, if she chains them to the gates, what then? Do we retreat and leave her to rule? Do we let her starve them and call it mercy? No one answered immediately. Jaime cleared his throat. I know my sister, he said. She will not surrender. Not to you, not to anyone. She would rather see the city fall on her head than bend the knee. Helpful, Davos muttered. What would make her stop? Jon asked Jaime. Jaime hesitated. His gaze dropped to the lion piece on the map, then to his golden hand. She's always been afraid of one thing, he said. Dying alone. She'll lash out at anything that tries to pry her fingers from that throne. But if she thought she could die with someone she loved, she might accept it. He swallowed. She might listen to him. Who? Daenerys demanded. Me, Jaime said. The room stilled. You'd go south, Tyrion said slowly. Back to her, after everything. If it means keeping the city from burning, Jaime said. Yes. Arya could see the war on his face. Love and guilt and duty twisted together into something ugly. "She'll kill you," Sansa said. "Then that's what I deserve," he replied. "For Bran. For your father." Bran's expression did not change. "You have more roads than that," he said. "Tried that once," Jaime said. "It brought me here, and perhaps it will bring you somewhere else yet," Bran replied. Daenerys tapped the lion piece hard. "No," she said. "I will not send you to her as some offering. She will take you and still fight. She will parade you from the walls and laugh as the city burns around you." "So we're back where we started," Davos said. "Siege or storm, or something else," Tyrion said. He looked toward the shadows where Arya stood, as if he could feel her there. His gaze slid past her, perhaps seeing nothing. "Cersei has few real weaknesses. Her children were one. They're gone. Her pride is another. It would rather die than bend. The last is that she trusts almost no one." He paused. "Almost. You?" Daenerys asked sharply. He snorted. "Not anymore." "Me," Jaime said tiredly. "Still, a little." "Then perhaps you are our knife," Tyrion said. "Not to kill her, to open a door." Sansa frowned. "What do you mean?" "If he can get into the city," Tyrion said. "If he can reach her, talk to her, distract her. Others might slip through in the chaos. People she doesn't expect. People who know how to move unseen." Daenerys understood first. Arya saw it in the way her eyes narrowed, the way her head turned slightly toward the corner. "You mean assassins," the queen said. "Knives in the dark. Better one knife in the dark than 10,000 swords in the streets," Tyrion said. "If we can end her without setting the city alight, we should try." "Who?" Jon asked. Silence answered him. All eyes seemed to drift, one by one, toward the same point in the room. The shadows by the door. Arya stepped out. Narration prompt 19. "I've killed queens before," Arya said. It wasn't strictly true. Walder Frey had never worn a crown, but he had held power over lives and used it to crush instead of shelter. That was close enough. The room's attention settled fully on her. Jon's eyes widened. Sansa's narrowed, but not with surprise. Tyrion's mouth quirked as if some private calculation had just resolved in his favor. Daenerys watched her as one might watch a blade being drawn. "I know how to get into places I'm not meant to be," Arya went on. "Harrenhal, the twins, Bravos, the Red Keep." She let that last one sit. "I can reach Cersei Lannister where your dragons can't fly and your armies can't march." "And then?" Daenerys asked. "Then she dies," Arya said. Her voice did not tremble. Killing Cersei felt inevitable, like a door she had always been walking toward. Jon looked stricken. "Arya, you can't ride a dragon into the throne room without killing half the city," she said, cutting him off. "You know that. Bran knows it. They know it too." She nodded toward Tyrion and Varys. "You want peace? Take away the one person who's keeping the war alive." "Assassination has a way of making martyrs," Davos said. "Let her be a martyr in the eyes of the people who loved her," Arya said. "The rest will be glad enough she's gone." "Cersei has always assumed her enemies will come with banners flying," Tyrion said. "Her greatest weakness is that she cannot imagine anyone more like the shadows she employs than herself." "Do you want her dead?" Arya asked him. Tyrion considered. "I want the city not to burn," he said. "If her death accomplishes that, then yes. I want her dead." Daenerys's gaze did not waver from Arya's. "You would do this for me?" she asked. "For my claim?" Arya shook her head. "No. I do it because she's on my list." Jon flinched. "Arya, and because if she lives, she'll keep hurting people who never chose any of this," Arya added. "You want to break the wheel? She's one of the spokes, maybe the thickest one." Daenerys exhaled slowly, something like relief and wariness mixed on her face. "I don't trust the way you talk about killing," she said. "You sound too eager." "I'm good at it," Arya said. "People are always eager to be good at things." Sansa stepped closer to the table. If she does this, she said, looking at Daenerys, will you stay your hand? If Cersei falls without Dragonfire, will you spare the city? Daenerys's jaw clenched. If the city surrenders, she said, if the people lay down their arms and open their gates, I will not burn them. And their queen, Sansa pressed. Daenerys's eyes flicked to the wooden lion. If your sister kills her, she said, then there will be no queen left to burn. Jon looked between them, torn. This isn't right, he said. We're supposed to be better than her. Our father was better than her, Sansa said. He told the truth. He showed mercy. She put his head on a spike. The world didn't get kinder because he was noble, Jon. It got worse because she saw mercy as weakness. Tyrion nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said, the choice isn't between being better and being worse. It's between being worse and letting someone else be much, much worse while you watch. Jon's shoulders sagged. He looked at Arya. If you go, you may not come back. I know, she said. You've only just come home, he said. I've only just got you back. She smiled, small and sharp. You never really had me, Jon. Not in the way you think. I'm not the girl who chased cats in the Red Keep. I'm not the girl who wanted to learn to be a knight. I'm something else now. You're my sister, he said. Yes, she said. And that's why I'm the one who can do this. You're too honest. Sansa's too valuable. Bran's too strange. I'm the one the world doesn't see until it's too late. Bran's eyes were on her, calm and distant. Every path from here has blood on it, he said. Yours at least leads through fewer fires. Jon closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. If you go, he said, don't do it for thrones. Do it for the people who'll never know your name. I stopped killing for myself a while ago, Arya said. I just didn't realize it. She reached out and flicked the wooden lion from the map, toppled, rolled, and came to rest on its side. Narration prompt 20. The snow had started again by the time Arya climbed the steps to the battlements. Winterfell spread out below her in shades of gray and white. The courtyard was a churn of activity. Men dragging supplies, smiths checking straps and buckles, stable hands leading horses back and forth. The smell of smoke lingered, embedded now in the stone. Beyond the walls, the world fell away in gentle slopes and ragged treelines, all softened by snow. The King's Road cut south like a dark vein, disappearing into the distance. She rested her hands on the cold stone, fingers splaying. Her breath plumed out before her. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Cersei Lannister sat in a red tower, sipping wine, counting her enemies like coins. Somewhere beyond that, men and women stacked firewood and lined up for stale bread, none of them knowing that their lives might hinge on whether a girl from the north could slip into a palace and make one clean kill. Felt absurd when she thought about it that way. The House of Black and White had taught her that death was the only god that mattered because it came for kings and beggars alike. They had not said that sometimes death had to be aimed. Footsteps sounded on the stairs behind her. You always did like high places, Sandor Clegane said. She glanced back. The hound stood a few steps below, cloak wrapped about him, snow dusting his broad shoulders. His burned half-face was turned away from the wind. You're leaving, she said. He snorted. You've been spying on stables again. Old habits, she said. He came up beside her, resting his elbows on the parapet. They stood in silence for a moment, looking south. What will you do? She asked. Same as always, he said. Find the ugliest thing I can and hit it until it stops moving. Your brother, she said. She remembered the mountain's massive frame, the way he had loomed over her once in the Red Keep, blood spattered on his armor. She remembered his helm closing over his face like the maw of some great beast. You could stay, she said. Hide in the kitchens. Peel potatoes for the rest of your life. He gave her a sidelong look. You could marry your lord and have fat little brats and spend your days telling them not to run with swords. She wrinkled her nose. Sounds awful. Exactly, he said. They watched the road. You going south too? He asked after a time. Yes, she said. To kill her. He didn't need to say the name. Yes, she said again. He grunted. Figures. You always were a little monster. Better than being a big one, she said. He laughed. A low, rough sound. Your sister knows? He asked. She knows I'm going somewhere, Arya said. That's enough. If she has to say she forbade me, she can. If she has to say she never knew, she can do that too. And Stark the bastard? Sandor asked. Jon knows, she said. He doesn't like it. Good, Sandor said. Means you're doing something worth doing. She eyed him. You're not going to tell me to stay? To let other people fight my battles? He snorted. You'd stab me in my sleep if I tried. True, she said. They fell silent again. The snow thickened, swirling around them in lazy eddies. I used to want to kill her with needle, Arya said suddenly. Cersei. I imagined walking up to her in the throne room, just a little girl with a sword, and sticking it through her throat before anyone could move. Too clean, Sandor said. Too easy, she corrected. She's had too many easy deaths given to other people. Father, Septim Mordain, those children in the September. She deserves to know what's coming. Sandor's jaw worked. You start thinking like that, he said. You end up loving the killing more than the justice. You would know, she said. He said. She looked at her hands on the stone, at the faint scars along her knuckles. I don't love it, she said. Not anymore. It's just what I'm good at. What I can do that no one else can. There's always someone else, Sandor said. But there's not always someone who can look a monster in the eye and not flinch. That's your gift, girl. Don't waste it on anything smaller than a queen. She smiled, despite herself. You want company on the road? She asked. You'd slow me down, he said. You're older, she countered. He snorted. You'll come anyway. Yes, she said. He pushed away from the parapet. Then be ready, he said. We leave when the horses are saddled and your brother's back is turned. He's always turning it to someone, she said. Sandor started down the steps. Arya, he grunted without looking back. What? She asked. If you get there before me, he said, and you see him, my brother, don't kill him. Leave him for me. She thought of the mountain of the list in her head. Ser Gregor Clegane, Cersei Lannister. All right, she said. He's yours. And her? He asked. She's mine, Arya said. When he was gone, she stayed on the wall a while longer. Her list felt different now. It had been a necklace of stones she wore around her neck, each name a weight, each death a little bit of balance restored. Now it felt more like a blade she had sharpened for years, its edge honed on every loss. It was not just for her anymore. It was for the ones who would never know they'd almost died in Dragonfire, because a girl from the north had walked into a red castle and done what needed doing. She lifted her eyes to the south again, to the invisible line of the horizon. Cersei Lannister, she said quietly, tasting the name one last time as promise rather than curse. I'm coming. The wind took her words and scattered them, but somewhere far away, in a tower of red stone and cold marble, a woman might have shivered and not known why.